Hi, I'm Michelle from Take On Bar Exam Coaching, and this is my YouTube channel where I talk about all things bar prep. I'm a bar exam coach, so. And I've decided that I have a lot of information to share about how to help you pass the bar exam, given that I've been a bar exam coach forever and I was a law professor for 10 years. And so I have a lot to share with you, and I've been waiting for pretty packaging to be able to share. So I've been waiting for my office to look the way that I want it to look. It doesn't. Or for my videos to be edited the way that I want them to be edited. They're not yet. And in the meantime, time is getting away from us. All right. So if you will bear with me, I'm going to make videos. I'm going to post videos. They won't be polished or perfect, but the content should be the kind of content that you need to finally pass the bar exam. So I'm going to start. Okay. One thing that I want to beat to death is active recall. I think that active recall is this powerful weapon that you have in your arsenal. It's going to significantly improve your chances of passing the bar exam, but many of you don't even know what this thing is, even though that's how you learned many things as a kid. And so I want to chat about active recall. I want to chat about passive learning, chat about why active recall works and passive learning does not work as well. All right. So passive learning for me it's the long way. It's the long way to learning the law. And so, I want to talk maybe with a little bit of science. I want to talk about why actively engaging with the materials that you're trying to learn is going to help you. This is good for law students, and it's really, really good for folks sitting for the bar exam. If you figure this out as a law student, you don't need a bar exam coach. But if you don't figure this out while you're in law school, then yeah, you're looking to somebody like me to help you pass the bar exam. So this is the video that I wish I'd seen before I went to law school, and certainly before I took the bar exam. By the end of this video, I'm hoping, and I may have to break it up in many parts, just kind of depending on how much I ramble, but I'm hoping that by the end of this, you're gonna have the knowledge and the strategies you need to be able to transform your bar prep so that you can finally pass the bar exam. All right, so active recall. Maybe let me start by telling you how I stumbled into it. So I was attending law school at the University of Florida, and I probably way too much information, but my first semester grades were not what I expected. They were kind of sort of terrifying. I was used to getting excellent grades, and I'm not gonna lie, there were some C's on my first semester report card at the University of Florida, and I just couldn't understand why. I was the gunner, right? I was the one who was always raising my hand, getting all of the answers right, and my grades didn't reflect the level of my knowledge. And so I was having a bit of an existential crisis of sorts, right? I was going through the whole I'm an imposter. Like, I can make a video about that if you want to hear more about why you're not an imposter, right? If you're in law school, if you've graduated from law school, if you're sitting for the bar exam, if you are a lawyer, you're not an imposter, right? You just need to figure it out. But like, I was going through all of this, I'm an imposter, why am I here? I don't know anything. So I shut up in my classes and I stopped talking. Instead, I took notes, and then I used a method that my undergrad, Syracuse University, taught me, which was the Cornell Method. And so I divided my page vertically. I took notes down the right-hand side of my page, and then on the left-hand side, I would go back after class and I would write questions. So if the notes that I took during class, and also the notes that I took while reading my law textbooks, I treated those as being the answers, and then I would pose the questions, right? So kind of like Jeopardy, right? I would pose the questions down the left, like after class and after studying. And I took notes about everything. I took notes when I knew what the student was saying was wrong. I took notes when the student's responses to the Socratic method, I knew that they were correct. I took notes about the questions that the professor was posing. Because everything in that right column, because those were my answers, I had to come up with questions. And so I would essentially quiz myself, right? So I'd write those questions, and then I would cover up the answers, the notes that I'd taken in class, the notes that I'd taken in my textbook, and I would try to answer the questions. Eventually, I would go back through on my simplistic questions from first round. I'd modify them and I'd make my questions more complex. I was crafting hypotheticals that I thought my professor would ask in class. I was actively engaging with the materials. And so, needless to say, my grades shot up, except for tax, in my last semester. But my grades shot up and I was getting A's, I was getting B's, right? Tax was my last semester and I was feeling a little bit cocky. I already had my job lined up, and so I just wasn't doing what I needed to do as a student. Again, probably way too much information. Anyway, I graduated from law school. I had a job lined up. My job started September. My employer sort of said, well, as long as you pass the bar exam within a year, you're fine. And so I was like, well, I'm just not going to sit for the July bar exam because I am working in a summer program at my law school, and I'm helping incoming law students. So I wasn't really focused on passing the July bar. I decided that I was going to do the February bar exam anyway. The program that I was working in, it wrapped up. It was also 3 weeks before the bar exam. And I kind of said, well, why don't I just sit for it? Like, it's like, I've got a year. So like naively, I've got a year. So why don't I just take it? And so I had 3 weeks to get ready for the bar exam. My school partnered with a big bar prep company. And I went down, I sat in lectures. I realized that the lectures weren't working for me. They were taking too long. I didn't have time to sit in these classes all day long and kind of fill in the blanks in outlines. And so then I started taking the recordings home, thinking that if I were at home, well, at least I'm not limited to the hours, right, that the live class is going on, and I can work longer. Well, the recordings, those weren't working for me either, because it was so much stuff. Like, it was like everything that I should know about torts or constitutional law, and like there's no way the bar exam is testing all of that. Like, that's kind of what I kept telling myself. Like, this is just too much. Like, I feel like my law school is excellent and my law school taught me so much. Like, these guys in the bar prep materials, they're just going like above and beyond. And like, there's no way I'm gonna learn all of that stuff. And so I said, screw this. Like, there's gotta be a better way for me to figure that out. And the better way for me has ultimately become what I teach other people in my bar prep coaching. So that's kind of where I started from. It doesn't make sense to just sort of sit and passively try to learn the law. You've got to be actively engaged with the law. The Cornell Method started that off for me, but I've discovered like other methods that are even better, right? Including QLists. Right, so let's talk about some of the passive learning tools that they don't work. All right, so first up, highlighting. We've all been there, right? We're hunched over our outlines, our textbooks, we've got a highlighter in hand, and we're diligently marking everything that is seemingly important, right? But it's passive, because all you're doing is reading and you're thinking about it in your head. And then, quite frankly, you end up over highlighting everything. Highlighting is limited engagement, right? You're passively allowing your mind to wander. You might be physically present with the material, but your brain isn't actively processing or retaining the information, right? And so I call this pseudo studying. It gives you the illusion of understanding, but highlighting something that doesn't guarantee that you understand it, right? You might mark a passage because it sounds familiar, right? But when somebody asks you a question about that area of the law, or if somebody asks you to apply what you've just highlighted to a scenario, it's fuzzy, right? The details are fuzzy. You don't know how to do it. Highlighting is also going to give you a false sense of confidence, right? The reason that you end up over highlighting is because the more color you see, the more you feel like you've seen it all, you know it all, but all you've done is like art. You've just done some art on the page, but do you really know that stuff, right? Do you really know it? Can you use it? Not really when you're just highlighting. And so I actually think that highlighting is detrimental to you studying because you're not actively engaged with the materials. Rereading. All right, so rereading is something else that folks do, and again, the problem there is it's deceiving, right? It deceives you into thinking that familiarity is enough. And so some people will read and reread and reread and reread and, oh my gosh, reread again, and think that because I've reread this material 10 times, it means that I know it. And so it's a passive approach, and again, it gives you the illusion of mastery. So you might be breezing through the material feeling like you understand it, but it's surface level understanding. Okay, so if you have all of these legal concepts, and I'll just give you an example. So so you've read and you've reread, and so all of a sudden someone's like, oh, contracts. You're kind of like, yeah, I know about contracts. You form them by showing that you have an offer and acceptance and consideration, right? Or if you're fancy, you need mutual assent and consideration and no valid defenses. Okay, fine, you've just regurgitated that, but can you apply it? Can you identify what an offer is? Can you identify what an offer is not? Do you understand acceptance? Do you understand the mirror image rule? Like, do you understand? Can you explain that stuff to me? As opposed to just, well, because I read and I reread, I've got top level surface understanding, but if you drill down, I don't understand. So if you're just rereading, you're creating all kinds of problems for yourself, right? Rereading, it creates a linear path, right? So you're revisiting everything that you've already covered, but you're missing the crucial step of identifying where you struggle. You're not identifying your gaps, right? Active recall, which we'll talk more about in a minute, active recall will get you to kind of identify where your gaps are, all right? And I did say that maybe we chat a little bit about science. And so there's this thing called the forgetting curve. And so science says, the moment that you learn something, you start forgetting it. And so what you have to do is interrupt the forgetting curve, and active recall techniques will help you to do that. Simply rereading material, it doesn't combat that natural forgetting curve process that happens. And so you end up not developing the kind of memory, right, and strengthening your neural pathways that will enhance long-term memory. Next up, we could talk about summarizing and why summarizing isn't going to be enough. And maybe like the classic example that I can use are Cliff Notes. A lot of college kids, they don't read the book. They buy Cliff Notes, right, which is a summary of the book. And then the teacher starts drilling down in the book and asking about the nuances in the text, and the student can't answer those questions. That student read the Cliff Notes, understands the big picture, but doesn't understand the nuances. And so summarization is the same thing when you're learning the law. So summarization is going to help you to condense a lot of information into a concise format, yes, right? And it sounds like it could be a good strategy if you're a law student or if you are taking or retaking the bar exam, but it's not really going to allow you to retain the legal concepts in the way that you need to retain them. And that's because you lose the nuances and you lose the details, right? So the bar exam, and I like to say it this way, right? The bar exam's not testing the top level. It's not really testing, do you understand how a contract is formed generally? It's testing an exception to the rule. It's testing an exception to the exception. It's testing a nuance. And if all you're doing is summarizing, then you could be missing crucial nuances and details that you need on the bar exam. Summarizing complex legal topics can often unintentionally lead you to misinterpretations or oversimplification. The focus is on recognition, so you recognize concepts, but again, you can't apply them to new situations as efficiently, as effectively, right? And you can't articulate them as well under pressure. Similarly, a lot of people like to recopy the outline. Like, why? Like, that's just not a strategy to learn anything, but that's what people do. They've got a pretty outline and then they recopy the outline, or they've got a rule and they recopy the rule, right? That's not furthering your knowledge, your understanding. It's not helping you figure out how to use that information to analyze a legal problem and apply that knowledge to new situations. And so that doesn't work either. Mnemonic devices, right? So cute little acronyms that help you to remember stuff. The problem with mnemonic devices is sometimes you spend so much time on memorizing the mnemonic device and then trying to remember what each letter stands for that you're not spending enough time on what each of those words means. They're there to trigger recall of a single concept or a single rule, but the bar exam requires a deeper understanding of the law. So you might use your mnemonic device to remember the acronym, but can you explain the nuances and the exceptions that are associated with that legal principle that mnemonic device represents? All right. As with all of the sort of passive learning things that I've been chatting about so far, the same is true with mnemonic devices and the fact that they build this false sense of confidence, right? So you memorize the mnemonic and you're like, yay, I know it, right? Because you can memorize an acronym, but you don't understand the underlying legal principles. And so you might end up misinterpreting the concept, or you're just struggling to apply it during the exam. So the other thing that I want to chat about are visuals. A lot of people are visual learners, and I get that, but just having images, right, pictures and diagrams, that's not going to be enough to get you through the bar exam. So if you're a visual learner, you're going to feel really comfortable relying on pictures and diagrams and flowcharts to grasp legal concepts, and they can be valuable, but again, they have limitations. And so it's a limited representation of a really complex concept. A lot of the law that you're learning, it's these abstract principles, and it can be difficult to fully represent that if you're using pictures, if you're using something static. And so a diagram can provide a basic framework, but it's not going to capture the intricacies of the law or the exceptions that might show up in specific scenarios. You're seeing a diagram, and so in your prep, the diagram is familiar, right? It triggers recall of some associated concept. But at the bar exam, you've got to do more than just have your memory triggered. You've got to be able to, again, analyze, right? Whether it's in a multiple choice question or in an essay. So visuals are not enough for you to be able to pass the bar exam. The other thing that I should touch on is I'm also not saying that all of these passive learning tools, that you should combine all of them and somehow through these passive learning tools, you're going to learn what you need, because you're not just relying on one, you're doing a combo, you're doing 2 or 3 passive learning tools. What I am saying is instead of even going to those passive learning tools in the first place, work on actively learning the law. Actively learning the law is your shortcut to being able to pass the bar exam. Active recall, that is how you're going to develop the long-term memory that you need. And I don't care if you're finding this video a month before the bar exam, 2 weeks before the bar exam, 6 months, a year. Active recall is going to get you closer to passing the bar exam than any of those passive learning tools that you may have been relying on so far. All right. So it's time to talk about active recall. It is the champion of you not only learning your rules, but understanding them, being able to articulate them, being able to apply them, being able to figure out where your gaps are. It helps you to figure out how to fill your gaps. It helps you to do stronger analysis. It helps you to do analysis in the first place too, right? Because sometimes it's, I don't even know how to do analysis, but it can help you to do analysis. So let's chat about what it is. Active recall is the process of retrieving information from your memory without relying on external cues. All right. So, and this is the example. If you've chatted to me on the phone, right, for a breakthrough session, you've heard me say this because I really need to kind of like make this stick with you. This is an example of actively engaging with the materials and active recall. When you were a kid and you had to learn your times tables, your multiplication charts, you did not listen to somebody lecture you about it. You didn't read it and reread it and highlight it. You didn't copy it, right? Only. You might have like copied it, but you didn't just copy it only. How did you learn it? You practiced doing it over and over and over again. You were output driven. All right. So you went home to a loved one, or you had a friend, and the friend would quiz you and you would give answers. And your ability to give those answers was proof that you understood, that you knew it. You knew how it worked. So that's how you learned your times tables. That is actively recalling, actively engaging with the materials, right? So as a kid, somebody quizzed you. As a kid, you sat from memory and you wrote out your times tables. Okay. Again, you weren't just copying what somebody else wrote. You weren't just rereading. You weren't highlighting and saying, yay, I know it. Because look, from 1 times 1 to 12 times 12, it's all colored yellow, so I must know it. You didn't do it that way. For some reason, we get to law school and we get more complex information, and then we get a little bit dumber about how we learn. And I don't know why that is, but that's probably another video. So in essence, that's what active recall is. And so let's chat about actively learning. Let's chat about active recall some more. All right, so various forms of active recall. Flashcards. So typically you've got a concept on one side of the card, and then you've got answers on the other side of the card. So for instance, the front of the card might say negligence, and then the back of the card might say duty, breach, causation, and damages. And so the focus of that style of a flashcard is on reinforcing your memory through repetition. Some people will use something called spaced repetition along with flashcards. I love spaced repetition. We can talk more about that too. And so flashcards, they are really great for remembering vocab or simple legal concepts. They can be easy to create because oftentimes it's just a note card, or maybe you're using some sort of a flashcard program. The limitations of flashcards is that they can oversimplify complex topics, and they encourage passive recognition rather than active recall if you overuse them. So another form of actively engaging with the materials, active learning, self-explanation. So as you are learning the law, make sure that you're explaining it to yourself. right? What does this really mean? Explain your thought process out loud. Justify how you're arriving at that answer. And you should be doing that with your multiple choice questions and also with your essay writing, right? Short answer writing too. Kind of explaining how you're getting there, okay? Ultimately, that's what the bar examiners want to see when you write. They want to see how you arrived at the answer, not necessarily the answer that you reached, okay? Analysis is all about the journey. It's not about reaching your final destination, not about the conclusion. It's about the journey to the conclusion. So self-explanation is good for that. Something else that you can do is you should explain everything to everyone. So one of the things that I like to say is if you truly understand that rule and how it works, you should be able to explain that rule on many levels. You should be able to explain it to the law professor who taught you the subject. You should be able to explain it to an English professor, right? So someone who's sophisticated but doesn't understand the law, you should be able to explain it to them. You should be able to explain it to a family member who is a non-lawyer. You should be able to explain it to a teenager, right? The 18-year-old teenager as well as the 13-year-old teenager. You should be able to explain it to a 5-year-old too. All right, so yeah, 5-year-olds aren't gonna come up and ask you about negligence, right? But you should be able to explain to a 5-year-old what negligence is and how it works. Explain everything, right? So teaching the concept is another method. We just talked about explaining. Now we're talking about teaching. If you can teach somebody something about the law, then that means that you have to articulate the law in simpler terms, and that's going to reinforce your own understanding. All right, so explaining, but also, you've got the relatives who call you up. All right, such and such just happened to so and so. What do I do? And you always have to preface it with, well, I'm not a lawyer, but this is my understanding how things work. Now go find a lawyer, right? So you're in essence teaching concepts to other people, right? Everything that I've just mentioned, those are a form of active learning, active recalling. Active recall is output driven. It's not about you soaking up information and holding it in. It's about getting the information out of your head. That's how you prove you know it. Let's chat about QLists. So, chatted about flashcards. QLists are even better than flashcards. A QList has a series of open-ended questions that are designed to promote critical thinking and active recall. They're going to require you to have a more detailed and integrated response. They're going to deepen your understanding by requiring that you connect multiple concepts or apply your knowledge in new contexts. QLists are best for mastering complex legal topics and developing your analytical skills and engaging with the material on a deeper level. As I've mentioned, they're going to encourage active recall and application of concepts. If you're working QLists, for example, you're going to see, the bar examiners could cross property with con law by talking about zoning related issues. So you can see how to cross subjects. QLists deepen your understanding. A downside of doing QLists is that answering the questions can be more time consuming. They're going to require discipline and you self-assessing the quality of your answers, right? So I'm recognizing that there are some downsides to QLists, but you're not creating them because I've created them. All right, so the creation part of it, that's taken care of. The answering part of it, that's on you. A QList, though, will allow you to get family members or friends to use them with you and quiz you on them. QLists are, I think, the superior active recall tool. And if you're interested, they're down below I've linked them. They're also on the website, right? takeonbarexam.com, right? So you can find them there. To kind of recap, let's just maybe run through again some reasons why active recall will make you a bar exam boss. Active recall is going to boost memory retention. Science, right? Active recall strengthens the neural pathways in your brain. They create long-term memories that won't fade under exam pressure. Active recall will interrupt the forgetting curve. Remember, our brains are naturally wired to forget information. Active recall combats that by forcing you to constantly re-engage with the material, solidifying your understanding. Active recall helps you to identify your knowledge gaps. So as you're engaging with the material, you're going to inevitably encounter areas where you struggle. And that kind of self-assessment is going to force you to target your studying and focus on the topics that require more attention. It doesn't make sense to keep going over the stuff you know. You have to find and fill your gaps. Active recall helps you to do that. Active recall improves critical thinking. It's going to challenge you to analyze legal concepts from multiple angles. It's going to create deeper thinking skills, right, that are essential to you being successful on the bar exam. Active recall enhances your problem-solving abilities. So by actively applying the law to practice questions and scenarios, you develop your problem-solving skills, and that's going to equip you to tackle the legal problems that are on the bar exam or on your law school exams. Active recall boosts your confidence. The more that you actively recall information, you're going to start answering your practice questions correctly, and the more confident you're going to become, right? If somebody is quizzing you about the law and you're able to answer questions about the law quickly, that will boost your confidence. Active recall forces you to engage with the material in a meaningful way, right? Moving away from like passive memorization and promoting a deep understanding of the legal concepts that you're being tested on. Speaking of testing, active recall improves test-taking skills because it forces you to engage in self-explanation or in teaching the concepts to other people, and that can mimic the actual pressure of being in an exam, right? What's actually happening in an exam? A question is thrown at you and you have to explain it, and you have to explain it quickly. All right. And so getting involved with active learning, that can help you to do just that. Active recall will adapt to different learning styles. So active recall, it's not a one size fits all approach. You can tailor it. So if you enjoy visual learning and you want to create your mind maps and your flow charts and your diagrams, fine. But now actively engage by quizzing yourself about what that box on your chart means. Don't just look at it, don't just read it, don't just walk by it and kind of think you know it. Quiz yourself about it. If you're more of an auditory learner, record yourself explaining legal principles and listen back to it to solidify your understanding. Active recall increases efficiency, right? It's going to save you time in the long run. If you're focusing on retrieving information and identifying your weaknesses, then that means that you're avoiding wasting time by rereading material that you've already grasped, all right? So this is going to allow you to kind of strategically target and study your weak areas so that you can maximize your learning gains. All right, so again, if QLists sound interesting, they are linked below. They're on the website, but whether you use QLists or not, active recall, active learning, all right? Ditch the highlighting, ditch the rereading, ditch the copying, and start making sure that you can explain everything and you can answer questions about the law. If you can answer a question, right, then move on to something that you can answer and start drilling yourself until you can answer those questions in that area. All right. I don't know. I hope this was interesting. I've sat here and I've spoken for way longer than I thought that this was going to take. If this sort of content is interesting to you, then pretty please subscribe to my channel. If you want to share with me the kind of content that you want to see, please tell me that in the comments. All right. I really do. I want this channel to be helpful. I recognize that you might only be with me for one bar prep cycle, and wouldn't that be great? But I want this content to be helpful to you and to be helpful to others. And so tell me what you want to see. All right. So at Take On Bar Exam on YouTube and on all of the other major socials. All right. Take good care of yourself. I don't know. Maybe I'll do another one of these next week if you guys seem to be loving this stuff. Like maybe I'll do it more frequently if you like it. Anyway, that's it. Take care.